Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is a distinct expectation of precision. It is, it's sort of like engineering.
Right.
If you break your arm, the X-ray shows a jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor simply points the film and tells you exactly what is wrong.
Yeah, it's visible. It is categorized immediately.
Exactly. We rely on that visibility to feel safe. But when you step into the reality of a military-grade chemical weapon being deployed in a completely civilian setting, well, that X-ray machine becomes entirely useless.
Absolutely useless.
The visibility just vanishes. You are suddenly looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely unprecedented in modern civilian life. And the medical professionals they're left staring at a void.
And the initial reaction from first responders in these situations is profound confusion, because they're encountering symptoms they have never seen outside of a historical textbook on Cold War chemical warfare.
Right, there is no jagged line to point to.
No, there is only a catastrophic systemic failure of the human body. And the cause is completely invisible to standard medical screening.
I want you, the listener, to keep that invisibility in mind today, because that is exactly where we are starting our analysis. We're tracing the complete chronological biography of the attempted assassination of former Russian military officer Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia.
An event which took place in the quiet, historic city of Salisbury, England.
Yes. We're going to examine the exact timeline, starting from the day of the poisoning. And we will follow the geopolitical shockwaves, the tragic collateral damage, and, honestly, the massive intelligence blunders right up to the present day.
We have gathered a vast compilation of chronological reports, official government records, international investigations, and media transcripts to piece all of this together.
And the documentation reveals an event that fundamentally altered global diplomacy. It forced the international community to rewrite chemical weapons treaties.
It completely changed how intelligence agencies operate in the digital age, too.
So I want you to imagine your own quiet hometown. Picture the parks, the local restaurants, the shopping centers.
The places you go every single weekend.
Exactly. Now imagine that everyday environment suddenly becoming ground zero for a military-grade nerve agent. It is a chilling juxtaposition.
It is.
And it immediately begs a crucial question. How could a foreign state actor possibly think they could execute a chemical weapons attack unnoticed in a modern, heavily surveilled European society?
Well, that paradox is central to this entire event. My focus here is to unpack the context behind the chemistry of the weapon itself, the mechanics of the intelligence operations that delivered it, and the intricate international diplomacy that defined the resulting crisis.
Because what began as an invisible, highly localized medical emergency in a small English city very quickly escalated.
Oh, it escalated into a severe geopolitical confrontation between nuclear powers.
So let us examine the timeline of that medical emergency, starting in March of 2018. We need to look closely at the precise chronology of that weekend, specifically Saturday, March 3rd and Sunday, March 4th.
All right, so the sequence begins on Saturday, March 3rd. At 14:40 Greenwich Mean Time, Yulia Skripal, who was 33 years old at the time, arrived at Heathrow Airport in London.
She had flown in from Sheremetyevo International Airport in Moscow, right?
Yes, and her purpose was just a routine family visit. She was traveling down to see her 66-year-old father, Sergei, who had been living as a resident in Salisbury for several years.
The documentation tracks their movements the following day, Sunday, March 4th, with a level of precision that is, well, it's only possible in a society covered by surveillance cameras.
It really is staggering when you look at the minute-by-minute breakdown.
It is. At 09:15 in the morning, Sergei Skripal's vehicle, which was a burgundy 2009 BMW 320, is captured on cameras driving through the area of London Road, Churchill Way North, and Wilton Road in Salisbury.
Then there is a gap of a few hours where they are presumably at his home. Then at 13:30, that same burgundy BMW is spotted on Devizes Road, heading directly toward the town center.
Okay, so they're heading into town.
Right. 10 minutes later, at 13:40, the Skripals parked their car at the upper-level car park at the Maltings. That is a large outdoor shopping area in Salisbury.
Got it.
And from the car park, they walked to a local pub called the Bishop's Mill.
Which is just a completely mundane Sunday afternoon routine.
Completely. They spend some time at the pub, and then at 14:20, they walk over to a restaurant called Zizzy on Castle Street to have lunch.
And they finish their meal and leave the restaurant at 15:35. Up to this very minute, nothing appears out of the ordinary at all.
Nothing.
But 40 minutes later, at 16:14, the emergency services received an urgent call. Two individuals, later identified as Sergei and Yulia Skripal, have been found unconscious on a public bench in the center of Salisbury.
And the discovery itself is a highly crucial detail because of who actually made it.
Right, who found them?
The people who found them were the chief nursing officer for the British Army and her teenage daughter, who simply happened to be walking by the bench.
Wow, what are the odds of that?
Exactly. And because of her extensive medical training, the chief nursing officer recognized immediately that this was not a standard medical collapse. It wasn't a heart attack or an overdose of recreational street drugs.
The specific symptoms they were exhibiting were highly alarming. According to eyewitness reports and official British government statements, the woman was foaming at the mouth.
Yes.
Her eyes were wide open, but they were described as completely white. Both of them were slipping rapidly in and out of consciousness on that public bench, completely unable to communicate.
By 17.10, they were evacuated from the scene. They were taken separately to Salisbury District Hospital, one via ground ambulance and the other transported by an air ambulance helicopter.
So they get to the hospital, and this is where the medical staff face the exact diagnostic void we discussed earlier.
Precisely. The patients were presenting with severe, catastrophic neurological symptoms. But routine toxicology screens would have shown absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
The cause of the organ failure was totally invisible. However, the severity of the symptoms prompted rapid administrative action.
Right.
By 09:03 the following morning, March 5th, the Salisbury NHS Foundation Trust officially declared a major incident in response to the profound concerns raised by their frontline medical staff.
And shortly after that, the situation was escalated into a multi-agency operation officially named Operation Fairline.
Yes.
Now, I need to stop and look critically at the timeline you just laid out because there's a glaring inconsistency here.
Okay.
You stated that the Skripals were out in public for hours. I mean, they drove their car across town. They navigated a shopping center car park. They sat in a pub and had drinks.
Right.
They sat in a restaurant and ate a full meal, and then they walked to a bench. If they were exposed to a military-grade chemical weapon, why was there such a massive delay in the onset of the symptoms?
It's a vital question.
Furthermore, how did that specific delay complicate the immediate response from law enforcement? Because they were moving around so much.
Well, the biological mechanics of the delay are complex and tied directly into how the chemical was administered, which we will examine when we look at the chemistry itself.
Okay.
But your second question regarding the operational complication is huge.
Yeah.
That multi-hour delay created an absolute logistical nightmare for the police and health authorities.
Because they were everywhere.
Exactly. Because the Skripals moved through so many highly populated public areas over the course of the afternoon, the potential contamination zone was enormous.
Right.
The police had absolutely no idea where the initial point of exposure was. They had to assume the chemical could be inside the burgundy BMW, it could be on the tables at the Bishop's Mill pub.
Or on the cutlery at the Zizzy restaurant.
Or on the public bench itself. First responders and hospital staff were treating these patients and securing these locations for hours without knowing they were dealing with a highly persistent, highly toxic, and transferable chemical agent.
Which brings us directly to the severe collateral damage and the human toll of this medical emergency. Because the contamination zone was so vast and unidentified, health authorities eventually had to process and check 21 different people.
21 people.
Including members of the public and emergency services, just for possible symptoms of exposure. But the most devastating secondary poisoning occurred to a police officer named Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey.
Yes. Detective Sergeant Bailey was one of the initial officers dispatched to Sergei Skripal's residence to investigate the premises after the Skripals were hospitalized.
Right.
He was aware that he was entering a potentially hazardous environment, and protocol was followed. He was wearing a full, specialized forensic suit designed to protect against biological and chemical hazards.
But despite that protective equipment, he was severely poisoned anyway.
He was. The chemical agent either penetrated the material of the suit itself or it bypassed the seals. He collapsed and was rushed to intensive care in a highly critical condition.
Wow.
He spent weeks fighting for his life before finally being discharged on March 22nd.
And the trauma he endured went far beyond the physical poisoning. Upon his discharge, he released a statement acknowledging that normal life for him would probably never be the same.
No, it completely changed everything.
The collateral damage to his life and his family's life was absolute. Because the chemical agent was so easily transferred, the microscopic amounts he inadvertently brought back with him contaminated his own home.
His own house.
He and his family lost their house and all of their personal possessions. Everything they owned had to be permanently confiscated and destroyed by the state because it could not be safely decontaminated.
It is hard to even fathom losing everything you own just because you walked into a room wearing a hazmat suit.
It is also important to note that the danger persisted long after that week. In August of 2019, official reports confirmed that a second police officer had also been poisoned while investigating the case.
Though they fortunately only suffered from trace amounts.
The indiscriminate, uncontrollable nature of the contamination also extended to the animals inside the Skripal home.
Right, the pets.
When the police sealed off the house, it became a highly toxic, restricted crime scene. There were pets locked inside. But because the lethality of the environment was so extreme, veterinarians were legally barred from entering the premises to retrieve them.
They just couldn't go in.
Exactly. When hazmat teams and veterinarians were finally permitted access weeks later, they found a grim scene. 2 guinea pigs had died of dehydration, and a cat was found in such a severely distressed and malnourished state that it had to be euthanized on site.
It is a very bleak image. I mean, you picture a suburban house completely frozen in time, saturated by an invisible lethal threat that just kills anything trapped inside.
It really is.
But the tragedy of this collateral damage did not end in March. The timeline jumps forward several months to an event known as the Amesbury poisoning, which took place on June 30th, 2018.
Yes. Amesbury is a small town located roughly 11 kilometers, or about 7 miles north of Salisbury. The incident involved 2 British nationals who had absolutely no connection to espionage, the military, or the Skripals.
Completely innocent civilians.
Entirely. A man named Charlie Rowley was scavenging through a charity litter bin in Salisbury and found a discarded, sealed perfume bottle.
Okay.
He took it home to Amesbury and presented it as a gift to his partner, Dawn Sturgis. She applied the contents of the bottle, spraying the substance directly onto the skin of her wrists.
And the physiological reaction was immediate and catastrophic.
It was. She fell severely ill within 15 minutes of applying the spray. She was rushed to the hospital, but the exposure was too massive. She tragically died a week later on July 8th.
And Charlie Rowley, who had also absorbed the poison through secondary contact with the bottle and with her, he survived, but only after enduring intense, agonizing medical treatment.
Right. And British counterterrorism police investigated this and concluded conclusively that this was not a new targeted attack.
Yeah.
It was the direct result of how the assassins disposed of the nerve agent after they poisoned the Skripals back in March.
What shocked the international intelligence community was the sheer volume of the chemical agent involved in this secondary tragedy. Forensic investigators later stated that the discarded perfume bottle contained enough of the pure nerve agent to potentially kill thousands of people.
Thousands.
It was an astonishing quantity of a military-grade weapon of mass destruction, just casually discarded in a public space accessible to anyone.
Anyone walking by.
I have to pause here and examine the logic of the operatives who executed this, because the analogy that comes to mind is an operative leaving a live, armed military landmine hidden in the sandbox of a public children's park and then simply walking away.
That is a very accurate comparison.
The primary objective of an elite intelligence agency is usually surgical precision.
Right.
If the goal was to eliminate one specific man, why would supposedly highly trained state assassins dispose of a weapon capable of mass casualties in such a profoundly careless manner?
Well, when you analyze the operational methodology, it points to a severe breakdown in field discipline and operational security.
How so?
The primary objective was indeed the assassination of Sergei Skripal. But once the agent was applied to the target location, the operatives were essentially holding a ticking time bomb.
Right, they had the rest of the bottle.
Exactly. They needed to discard the remaining physical evidence as rapidly as possible to ensure they could pass through airport security unhindered on their return flight to Moscow.
Okay.
The decision to toss a disguised bottle containing a massive quantity of a lethal nerve agent into a public charity bin demonstrates a calculated, reckless disregard for civilian life.
It reveals a striking juxtaposition. I mean, they possessed an incredibly sophisticated, scientifically advanced chemical weapon.
Yes.
But they handled its disposal with the panic and carelessness of amateurs.
To understand why that discarded bottle was so incredibly dangerous, we need to transition into the actual science of the attack.
Yeah.
The blood samples from the victims, and eventually the environmental samples from the town, were transported to the Defense Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down.
Porton Down is the United Kingdom's premier, highly secure military science and chemical weapons testing facility. It is where the most advanced chemical analysis in the country takes place.
Yes, and the chief executive of the facility at the time, Gary Aitkenhead, publicly confirmed the results of their analysis.
What did they find?
He stated that the substance was a highly pure, very rare military-grade nerve agent belonging to the Novichok family. Later, international reports and weapons inspectors specifically identified the substance as a derivative known as A234.
Aikenhead made a very specific point during his briefing. He noted that synthesizing this specific agent requires extremely sophisticated laboratory environments and complex chemical precursors,
Right.
methods that are essentially only within the capabilities of a well-funded state actor. He also confirmed a terrifying medical reality that there was no known antidote.
Not at all.
So I want to ask you to explain the science here. What exactly is a Novichok agent, and how does it actually function as a weapon?
Well, to understand Novichok, which translates from Russian as newcomer, you have to look back to the Cold War.
Okay.
It refers to a specific, highly advanced class of nerve agents developed by the Soviet Union between the 1970s and 1990s. The research was conducted under a highly classified, state-sponsored initiative known as the Foliant Program.
Foliant program.
Right. The goal of the Foliant Program was specifically to engineer chemical weapons that could evade standard NATO chemical detection equipment.
So they were designed to be invisible to the sensors.
Exactly. They were meant to bypass standard chemical protective gear and, crucially, be safer for the operatives to handle until the exact moment of deployment.
How do we even know so much about this program if it was top secret?
We know the detailed history largely due to the testimonies of former Russian scientists. Individuals like Vil Mirzayanov, who worked directly at the State Research Institute that engineered these agents and later relocated to the United States. He exposed the program's existence to the world.
Oh, I see.
Other chemical weapons scientists who remained in Russia, such as Vladimir Uglev and Leonid Rink, have also publicly confirmed the existence and the devastating efficacy of the Foliant program.
The historical documentation shows that the Salisbury attack was actually not the first time a Novichok agent was deployed for an assassination.
No, it wasn't.
In 1995, a prominent Russian banker named Ivan Kivalidi was fatally poisoned. The assassin used a similar nerve agent, applying it to the receiver of his office telephone.
Yes.
Furthermore, one of the scientists you just mentioned, Leonid Rink, actually received a 1-year suspended sentence in Russia for illegally synthesizing and selling Novichok agents to unnamed criminal buyers in connection with that very case.
That 1995 precedent is a critical piece of the puzzle. It establishes definitively that these agents were successfully engineered, that they are phenomenally lethal in microscopic doses, and that they have a proven history of being utilized in targeted, covert killings.
Right.
In the Salisbury operation, the UK's Department for Environment confirmed that the nerve agent was engineered to be delivered in a viscous liquid form.
Okay, a liquid.
Yes. Following the police reconstruction of the timeline, they concluded that the assassins applied the highest concentration of the liquid agent directly onto the handle of Sergei Skripal's front door.
Which brings me back to the timeline inconsistency we discussed earlier.
Yes, the delay.
If the liquid agent was applied to the door handle of his house, Sergei and Yulia Skripal had to have touched it when they left the house in the early afternoon.
Exactly.
They then got into a car, drove across town, walked through a shopping center, sat in a pub, and ate a long meal at a restaurant before finally collapsing hours later on a bench. How is it possible for a military-grade nerve agent to take that long to shut down the human body?
This is where environmental factors intersect with chemical engineering.
Okay.
Scientists and intelligence analysts have pointed to a crucial weather detail on the day of the attack. Salisbury was experiencing heavy fog and high environmental humidity.
So it was a damp day.
Very damp. And according to the original chemists who invented the Novichok formula, moisture is the enemy of this specific toxin.
Really?
Yes. Water molecules actively interact with and weaken the molecular bonds of the agent, degrading its potency over time.
Oh, wow.
The high humidity in the air and potentially condensation on the door handle itself likely degraded the chemical just enough to drastically slow down the biological absorption rate.
That is fascinating.
That specific weather pattern delayed the onset of the neurological collapse
Right.
and is widely believed by experts to be the primary reason the Skripal survived the initial concentrated exposure.
It is an incredible thought. The damp, foggy weather of an English Sunday afternoon might have literally saved their lives.
It very well might have.
But while the moisture may have weakened the agent's immediate lethality, it clearly did not wash it away. The persistence of this chemical is staggering. I want to look at the sheer scale of the environmental cleanup effort.
The cleanup was unprecedented.
According to the documentation, the remediation process was massive. By early 2019, military contractors had to construct a massive, hermetically sealed scaffolding frame, completely enclosing the Skripal house and garage.
Yes.
They spent 2 weeks carefully dismantling and physically removing the entire roof of the structure. The rebuilding process took 4 months.
And the cost was enormous.
Right. The total financial cost to the city of Salisbury for the recovery operation was roughly £7.5 million. Furthermore, Wiltshire police had to completely destroy 16 police vehicles. The emergency services had to discard multiple ambulances.
They couldn't save them.
And the contamination was so severe that some of these medical vehicles were literally buried deep in a specialized landfill near Cheltenham. Why is this chemical so resilient that standard cleaning is impossible, forcing the government to rip the roof off a house and bury ambulances in the ground?
Well, to understand that, you have to understand the specific intent behind the chemical engineering of Novichok. It was purposefully designed for area denial and extreme persistence.
What does that mean practically?
It means it does not evaporate easily, and it does not break down rapidly when exposed to sunlight or standard environmental conditions. Instead, the liquid agent acts almost like an invisible, highly adhesive oil.
An oil.
Right. It binds aggressively to microscopic porous surfaces, wood, plastic, the fabric of car seats, the complex medical equipment inside an ambulance.
I see.
Experts in chemical remediation noted that neutralizing it requires intense, repeated scrubbing with highly caustic specialized chemicals.
So you can't just wipe it down with bleach?
Not at all. In a complex environment like a residential home with its floorboards, insulation, and roofing materials, or the intricate interior cabin of an ambulance, it's essentially impossible to guarantee that every single microscopic trace has been eradicated.
And because it's so lethal.
Exactly. Because the lethal dose required to kill a human being is so infinitesimally small, the risk of secondary exposure years later remains too high. Destroying the physical structures, burying the vehicles, and physically removing the contaminated building materials is the only mathematical way to guarantee long-term public safety.
It is a terrifying testament to the sheer, enduring lethality of the weapon.
It truly is.
With the reality of the weapon established, we need to examine how the authorities actually managed to track down the people who deployed it. This takes us into the unmasking of the operatives and the cascading series of intelligence blunders that destroyed their cover.
Right.
The investigation was immediately taken over by the Metropolitan Police Counterterrorism Command. And to comb through the evidence, they deployed a very specific type of specialist known as super recognizers.
Yes, a vital part of the investigation.
What exactly is a super recognizer?
A super recognizer is a person possessing a rare, heavily researched cognitive ability to remember and identify human faces with extraordinary accuracy, even from incredibly grainy, distorted, or fleeting images.
So they're better than computer algorithms.
Often, yes. While typical facial recognition software can be hindered by angles, lighting, or low-resolution cameras, these individuals can spot bone structure and facial geometry intuitively.
That's amazing.
The police tasked a team of these specialists with an overwhelming objective. They had to manually trawl through up to 5,000 hours of CCTV security footage.
5,000 hours.
Pulled from the streets of Salisbury, transit hubs, and numerous international airports across the country. They then had to meticulously cross-reference those visual hits with massive databases of digital border entry data.
The scale of that digital dragnet is hard to comprehend, but it worked. Through that exhaustive visual analysis, the police identified 2 primary suspects.
They did.
These men had entered the country traveling under Russian passports with the names Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov. Once the faces were matched to the names, the police were able to construct an incredibly detailed, minute-by-minute, 48-hour timeline of their movements while on United Kingdom soil.
And the timeline reconstructed by the police is highly revealing of their operational methods.
Where did they start?
Petrov and Boshirov arrived on a flight from Moscow, landing at Gatwick Airport. From there, they traveled to East London and checked into the City Stay Hotel in Bow.
Okay, a hotel in London.
This location is critical because months later, in May of 2018, police forensic teams sealed off and tested their specific hotel room, and they discovered lingering traces of the Novichok nerve agent.
Wait, right in the hotel room?
Exactly. On the surfaces of the room they were sleeping in.
That's incredibly reckless. The timeline then tracks their movements out of London, It shows they took a reconnaissance trip by train down to Salisbury on Saturday, the day before the attack.
Right. They spent a short time in the city, presumably mapping the route to the target's house and checking the environment, before returning to London.
Then, they made a second train trip to Salisbury the following day, Sunday, March 4th. This was the day the poison was applied to the door handle.
Yes. And immediately after the attack window, they traveled back to London and swiftly flew back to Moscow via Heathrow Airport.
So they were in and out in about 48 hours.
Exactly. If the investigation had stopped at the border, Petrov and Boshrov might have remained untraceable ghosts. Their aliases would have held up.
But it didn't stop there.
No. The investigation did not stay within the confines of law enforcement. Independent, open-source intelligence organizations, most notably the investigative group Bellingcat, working alongside the Russian news outlet Fontanka, began digging into the publicly available data.
And they looked into the leaked Russian registry files associated with the names Petrov and Boshrov.
Yeah.
The discoveries made by these independent journalists are astounding. When they pulled the passport registry files for Petrov and Boshrov, what exactly did they find that blew the cover story apart?
They found a trail of administrative errors that completely unraveled the operation. First, the passport numbers issued to Petrov and Boshrov were only 3 digits apart. They were practically sequential.
Sequential passports.
Yes. Furthermore, those specific passport numbers fell into a distinct numerical batch that Bellingcat had already linked the passport file of another known Russian military intelligence official, a man who had previously been expelled from Poland for conducting espionage.
Oh, wow. So the number sequence itself was a red flag.
A massive red flag.
It gets worse for the operatives. When the journalists examined the civilian registry file for the alias Alexander Petrov, they found absolutely no historical record of a residential address, no tax records, and no identification papers existing prior to the year 2009.
It was a phantom profile.
Right. It strongly suggested that the identity was an alias artificially generated in that specific year.
And if that was not obvious enough, the physical dossier for this supposedly normal civilian was stamped with a strict directive reading, "Do not provide any information."
Which is not normal for a civilian passport.
Not at all. And it featured a handwritten annotation with the letters SS, which is a standard Russian administrative abbreviation for top secret.
Unbelievable. The independent Russian opposition newspaper Novaya Gazeta pushed the investigation even further, didn't they?
They did. They scrutinized the passport files and found a cryptic telephone number listed as a point of contact. When they traced that number, they found it was directly associated with the Russian Defense Ministry.
Specifically linking back to the headquarters of the Military Intelligence Directorate, universally known as the GRU.
Right. Through this relentless open-source investigative work, the digital masks were stripped away and the true identities of the assassins were revealed to the world.
Who were they really?
The man claiming to be Ruslan Bosharov was actually Colonel Anatoly Chepiga. He was not a low-level operative. He was a highly decorated military officer who had been awarded the title of Hero of the Russian Federation by a direct presidential decree in 2014. The man using the alias Alexander Petrov was identified as Alexander Mishkin, who served as a military doctor within the GRU.
As the investigation expanded, a third operative was eventually identified. His name was Denis Sergeyev, and intelligence sources believe he held the rank of Major General in the GRU.
Yes.
By analyzing his cellular communication patterns while he was in the United Kingdom during that weekend, investigators deduced that he was actively liaising with superior officers back in Moscow, effectively acting as the operational commander on the ground.
And international intelligence communities subsequently identified all of these men as belonging to a highly secretive unit within the GRU known as Unit 29155.
Unit 29155.
Right. This specific division is allegedly tasked with conducting overseas sabotage, subversion, and targeted assassinations.
Now, I have to challenge the logic of this entire operation. We are discussing one of the most feared intelligence agencies on the planet.
Without a doubt.
These men are highly decorated senior military officers operating within an elite specialized assassination unit. Yet the mistakes they made seem completely contradictory to the concept of elite espionage.
They do.
They travel using sequential passport numbers that link directly to other known spies. They leave chemical traces of a nerve agent in a budget hotel room in East London.
Yes.
They discard the weapon of mass destruction in a charity litter bin where anyone can find it. How does an organization with the resources of a nation-state operate with such glaring, catastrophic failures in basic operational security?
Well, It is a contradiction that intelligence analysts have debated heavily. It points to a deep, systemic cultural issue within that specific intelligence unit.
What kind of issue?
Analysts suggest that years of operating in certain environments had fostered a culture of extreme overconfidence and impunity. They had likely executed previous operations where they did not face severe consequences.
So they got sloppy.
Or perhaps they operated in an era before the pervasive digital forensics we see today. There is also a structural, bureaucratic reality to consider.
Right.
Generating a legend, a deep cover alias with an airtight, verifiable history spanning decades, requires immense time, financial resources, and administrative effort.
Creating a whole fake life.
Exactly. Creating a batch of identities all at once using sequential passport numbers from the same issuing office is simply an administrative shortcut.
It is bureaucratic laziness born out of arrogance.
Yes. They fundamentally underestimated the environment they were entering. They did not anticipate the sheer volume of CCTV coverage in the UK, nor did they anticipate the relentless speed and analytical depth of modern, crowdsourced, open-source intelligence investigations.
That arrogance and the subsequent unmasking of the operatives triggered a massive, unprecedented diplomatic crisis.
Right.
We need to examine the political fallout.
The fallout was swift.
Within days of the attack, as the evidence of state involvement mounted, the pressure on UK Prime Minister Theresa May to respond forcefully was immense. On March 12th, she stood before the House of Commons and delivered a formal statement that the international media immediately categorized as a direct ultimatum to Vladimir Putin.
The language May used in that address was highly specific and calibrated for international law.
What did she say?
She stated that the UK government had concluded it was highly likely that the Russian state was responsible for the deployment of the nerve agent. She presented the Russian government with two plausible explanations for the event.
Okay.
The first explanation was that this was a deliberate, direct act of aggression by the Russian state against the United Kingdom. The second explanation offered was that the Russian government had completely lost control of a catastrophically damaging military-grade nerve agent and allowed it to slip into the hands of unknown rogue actors.
She demanded that the Russian government formally explain which of these two scenarios was true by midnight of the following day.
And the Russian government completely refused to meet that demand or provide an explanation.
In response, on March 14th, Prime Minister May announced the UK's formal retaliation. She ordered the immediate expulsion of 23 Russian diplomats from the country, publicly identifying them as undeclared intelligence agents operating under diplomatic cover.
Yes.
In addition to the expulsions, the UK government froze specific Russian state assets, suspended all high-level bilateral diplomatic contacts, and announced that government ministers and members of the royal family would officially boycott the upcoming 2018 FIFA World Cup, which was being hosted in Russia.
It is important to acknowledge the domestic political debate occurring within the UK at that exact moment, though.
Right, the internal reaction.
The leader of the opposition Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, initially expressed caution regarding the government's response. He cast doubt on the wisdom of blaming the Russian state directly before the results of an independent international investigation could be fully verified.
He referenced the historical intelligence failures regarding weapons of mass destruction prior to the Iraq War as a primary reason for maintaining skepticism.
Exactly. However, a few days later, as more intelligence was briefed, he formally stated that he was satisfied the evidence did indeed point to Russia. He maintained, however, that initiating a severe crackdown on the illicit money laundering activities of Russian oligarchs operating within the UK financial system would be a far more effective punitive measure than simply expelling diplomats.
While the domestic debate played out, the global response was staggering. The UK government immediately called an urgent meeting of the United Nations Security Council to present their findings.
And the United States White House issued a statement expressing full solidarity with the UK.
And then a coordinated global domino effect of diplomatic expulsions began. 28 separate countries, encompassing members of NATO and the European Union, expelled a record-breaking total of 153 Russian diplomats.
The United States alone ordered the expulsion of 60 Russian intelligence officers and mandated the closure of the Russian consulate located in Seattle.
To understand the magnitude of that global response, you have to understand why this specific incident galvanized the international community so rapidly and forcefully.
It was not merely viewed as an attempted assassination of a former spy. The official statement from NATO clarified the gravity of the situation. This event marked the first offensive use of a military-grade nerve agent on NATO territory since the foundation of the alliance after World War II.
Wow.
It was interpreted by the international community as a brazen, undeniable violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention and a direct, physical threat to the established norms of international security.
The level of diplomatic coordination required to execute that response is phenomenal. Convincing 28 different sovereign nations to expel over 150 diplomats globally within a matter of days requires immense diplomatic leverage and shared intelligence.
It does.
How did this single event reshape the strategic posture of the West towards Russia?
It represented a definitive structural shift. For years prior to Salisbury, Western nations had maintained a posture of cautious, often fragmented engagement with Russia.
Right.
There had been a long, documented pattern of hostile activities ranging from aggressive, state-sponsored cyber attacks and coordinated interference in democratic elections to previous highly suspicious deaths of Russian exiles living abroad.
But the responses to those events were often muted, localized, or strictly economic.
Exactly. The deployment of a military-grade chemical weapon in a peaceful civilian European city crossed a definitive red line. It proved that the threat was no longer confined to the digital realm or abstract political interference. It was physical, it was highly lethal, and it was occurring indiscriminately on their own soil.
This realization unified the Western allies, shifting their collective strategy from cautious engagement to active, coordinated containment and deterrence.
Yes.
Faced with this unified, unprecedented global condemnation, how did the Russian state respond? This brings us to the Russian narrative and their deployment of information warfare.
The official response from the highest levels of the Russian government was a posture of absolute, complete denial.
Official spokespeople categorized the accusations as a grotesque provocation that had been entirely fabricated and rudely staged by British and U.S. intelligence agencies to frame Russia.
The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, forcefully rejected all claims of Russian involvement. He accused the UK government of spreading baseless propaganda to distract from their own domestic issues.
Leveraging the protocols of the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Russian government formally demanded that the UK provide them with direct access to the physical samples of the nerve agent for independent testing.
And the UK government flatly rejected this demand. In response to the global expulsions, Russia executed symmetrical retaliation, expelling an exactly equal number of diplomats from every country that had expelled theirs.
And they officially ordered the closure of the British Council office operating in Moscow.
That was the official diplomatic stance presented to the world. But if you analyze the messaging being broadcast simultaneously on Russian state media, a very different, far more menacing narrative emerges.
Right. For the first few days following the attack, the main national television channels in Russia simply ignored the incident entirely.
But that changed on March 7th when a prominent anchor named Kirill Klimyonov addressed the situation on Channel 1's flagship current affairs program.
Klimyonov's broadcast is a masterclass in psychological messaging. He began by attributing the poisoning allegations to the hysteria of British politicians.
But then, looking directly into the camera, he delivered an incredibly ominous warning aimed squarely at his domestic audience. He explicitly warned individuals he labeled as traitors that choosing to live in England was a hazardous career choice.
His exact words were highly calculated. He stated, "Maybe it's the climate, but in recent years there have been too many strange incidents with a grave outcome. People get hanged, poisoned, they die in helicopter crashes, and fall out of windows in industrial quantities."
The messaging was reinforced by other state media figures, too. Another high-profile presenter, Dmitry Kiselyov, broadcasted the claim that the poisoning was actually a false flag operation.
Stating it was only advantageous to the British establishment to nourish their Russophobia and to artificially organize a boycott of the upcoming World Cup.
Yes, he repeatedly referred to London as a pernicious place for Russian exiles.
And then we arrive at what is perhaps the most surreal moment of the entire crisis, the infamous RT television interview.
Yes. On September 13, 2018, as the international pressure reached its peak, the editor-in-chief of the state-controlled network RT, Margarita Simonyan, conducted an exclusive television interview with the two accused men.
They appeared on camera, presenting themselves strictly as the civilian tourists Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov.
In this broadcast, which was beamed around the world, the two men claimed they were simply ordinary sports nutritionists. They stated they were visiting the city of Salisbury strictly as tourists.
When pressed on their reason for traveling to that specific town, they claimed they possessed a deep desire to see the famous 123-meter spire of the Salisbury Cathedral and to look at its historic clock.
And they further claim that the only reason they had to take a second train trip to the town on Sunday, the day of the attack, was because freezing slush and deep mud had completely ruined their footwear on their first attempt on Saturday.
Throughout the interview, Simonian asked questions that entirely avoided any inquiry into their military backgrounds. Instead, she dropped very delicate, specific hints questioning their personal relationship status.
Repeatedly asking what exactly they had in common that caused them to spend so much time traveling together.
The intention behind Simonian's specific line of questioning was a calculated deflection tactic. By steering the conversation toward their personal lives, the implication being presented to the Russian domestic audience was that these two men might be a gay couple taking a private holiday together.
Right. And in the specific context of Russian military and political culture, this insinuation was designed to supposedly rule out any possibility of them being hardened elite GRU intelligence officers.
Now, I have to stop and examine the cathedral tourist excuse because it is difficult to process. From a logistical standpoint, they are asking the world to believe that two men flew all the way from Moscow to London, took a train to a small English city in freezing rain for 2 consecutive days, merely to view a cathedral spire.
Right.
And conveniently happened to be exactly at the location where a former Russian spy was simultaneously poisoned with a highly rare military-grade chemical weapon. It completely defies all statistical probability. Why would a sophisticated state actor deploy a cover story that is so flimsy and easily dismantled by basic logic?
Well, the logic makes sense once you understand the mechanics of modern information warfare.
Yeah.
Strategy at play here is often defined by analysts as the deployment of a parallel narrative, or the fire hose of falsehood.
A fire hose of falsehood.
Exactly. The primary goal of the RT interview, and the broader state media messaging, was never to successfully convince Western intelligence agencies or Western audiences of their innocence.
No.
No. The goal is to deliberately flood the global information space with alternative theories, absurdities, and deflections to create a dense fog of confusion. It exhausts the truth.
I see.
But simultaneously, this strategy serves a vital dual purpose domestically. By aggressively pairing official stern government denials on the diplomatic stage with winking, barely concealed threats on state television, like Klimenov's speech about traitors falling out of windows, the state achieves plausible deniability internationally while sending a terrifyingly clear message of intimidation locally.
Right.
It's a calculated show of force, dressed up as a farce.
Yeah.
Tells any potential dissident or defector, we can reach you anywhere, we will use a weapon that terrifies the world, and we will mock the investigation on television, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop us.
It is the weaponization of absurdity. But as we transition into examining the long-term aftermath and where things stand in the present day, we see that this strategy, while intimidating, ultimately backfired severely.
It backfired enormously.
Because this operation, which was fundamentally designed to project power and eliminate a target quietly, ended up causing massive structural damage to Russia's own intelligence networks.
The internal fallout inside the Russian intelligence apparatus was severe. The failure to eliminate Sergei Skripal, combined with the incredibly embarrassing unmasking of the elite agents by independent, open-source journalists, became a profound humiliation for Vladimir Putin on the world stage.
Intelligence reports indicate that this humiliation prompted fury within the Kremlin, resulting in a sweeping purge within the senior ranks of the GRU.
The chief of military intelligence at the time, Igor Korobov, faced intense, direct criticism. According to international reports, Putin was deeply angered over the operational blunders and personally scolded Korobov during a high-level meeting.
And the aftermath of that meeting is notable. Shortly after facing that criticism, Korobov reportedly collapsed at his home in sudden ill health. He subsequently died in November 2018 after what official state media vaguely described as a long illness.
The damage extended far beyond the leadership, too. The exposure of the bureaucratic shortcut, the sequential passport numbering system used by Unit Tunayan 155, created a devastating cascade effect for Russian intelligence operations worldwide.
Because Western intelligence agencies, aided by the Bellingcat reports, now knew exactly what specific numerical formats and bureaucratic anomalies to look for.
Exactly. They could actively flag and investigate the passport files of suspected Russian officers operating globally.
This sudden visibility forced numerous deep cover agents to abruptly abandon their assignments and flee back to Russia to avoid arrest. The documentation highlights specific examples.
Oh, there are several.
A woman operating under the elaborate alias Maria Adela Kufelt Rivera, whose real identity was later revealed to be Olga Kolobova, had been operating for years as a deep cover agent in Naples, Italy, integrating herself into social circles near NATO facilities.
Yeah.
Once the passport methodology was exposed, she was unmasked and had to escape the country overnight. In another instance, an agent operating under a false identity was identified, arrested, and jailed in Brazil.
The intense scrutiny also brought additional botched GRU operations to light. For example, it was revealed that in April 2018, shortly after the Salisbury attack, a team of Russian operatives attempted to physically hack the wireless networks of the headquarters of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW.
Located in The Hague, Netherlands.
Right. The Dutch Military Intelligence Service successfully thwarted the cyber attack, catching the operatives in the act as they attempted to destroy their specialized equipment and immediately deported them.
The mention of the OPCW is critical, as they play a defining role in the long-term legacy of this event. In direct response to the deployment of the nerve agent in Salisbury and the tragic secondary fatality in Amesbury, the OPCW undertook a thorough review of their international treaties.
In November 2019, they made a historic decision to officially add the Novichok family of nerve agents to Schedule 1 of their list of banned substances.
This was a monumental move that fundamentally altered global chemical weapons treaties, making the development, stockpiling, or use of these specific agents an explicit violation of international law. It was a direct, undeniable result of the events of March 2018.
Bringing the focus back to the local level, the recovery process for the city of Salisbury was arduous. The local government ultimately spent £7.5 million on the physical remediation of the contaminated sites, providing financial support to local businesses that suffered during the lockdowns.
And launching campaigns to boost tourism and restore the city's reputation. On the legal front, in 2021, the UK's Crown Prosecution Service officially authorized criminal charges against the three identified Russian men, Chapiga, Mishkin, and Sergei.
The charges include conspiracy to murder, attempted murder, causing grievous bodily harm, and the use and possession of a chemical weapon.
It must be noted, however, that these remain formal charges on paper. Under current international legal frameworks, formal charges cannot be tried in a British courtroom unless the men are physically arrested and present.
Given that there is no extradition treaty between the United Kingdom and Russia, and the men are residing in Russia, a trial remains a legal impossibility for the foreseeable future.
As for the human beings caught in the crossfire, Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, who endured immense physical agony and lasting psychological trauma, found himself unable to continue his career in law enforcement and had to retire early.
He eventually reached a financial settlement with the Wiltshire Police in 2022 regarding the incident.
And regarding the primary targets, Sergei and Yulia Skripal, their lives have been permanently upended. Senior British officials confirmed that following their extensive medical recovery, they were provided with entirely new identities and ongoing state support to begin a new life in hiding.
Reports indicate they have been relocated to New Zealand. Their fear of a secondary assassination attempt remains acute.
Just recently, they formally declined to appear or provide testimony at a 2024 public inquiry into the poisonings, citing severe ongoing fears for their personal safety. They are effectively living as ghosts.
When you step back and look at the entirety of this timeline, from the Burgundy BMW to the global diplomatic expulsions, I want you to consider the profound ultimate irony of this situation.
A highly sophisticated assassination attempt that was designed to quietly and surgically eliminate one single man in a quiet English town ended up causing an unprecedented global diplomatic crisis, and in the process, practically crippled an entire global intelligence network.
Yes. It stands as one of the most massive strategic miscalculations in modern intelligence history. The operation fundamentally failed in its primary objective, which was to kill Sergei Skripal.
But it succeeded wildly in unintended ways. It succeeded in completely unifying NATO allies against a common threat. It resulted in historic, massive diplomatic expulsions that degraded intelligence capabilities for years.
It accelerated the international banning of a highly classified class of chemical weapons. And, perhaps most damaging of all to the perpetrators, it permanently burned the cover identities of countless intelligence officers operating worldwide.
So what does this massive miscalculation mean for the future of espionage? It leaves you with a final reflection on the stark paradox of operating in the digital age. The Skripal case proves unequivocally that the traditional methods of covert operations are colliding with modern reality.
In a world governed by 5,000 hours of high-definition CCTV footage, instantaneous digital border data, Algorithmic facial recognition, super recognizers, and relentless crowd-sourced open-source intelligence, the era of the romanticized, untraceable secret agent might be completely over.
The dark, untraceable shadows where spies used to operate with absolute impunity are now brightly lit up by the massive digital footprints they cannot help but leave behind. The modern assassin can deploy an invisible chemical, but they can no longer hide from the visible data. Thanks for listening.